I arrived at my engagement gala to find my own name missing from the guest list at the door, and the next 40 minutes would end with a man in handcuffs and a charity board calling an emergency meeting before midnight. My name is Natalie, I'm 31, and I run a boutique financial consulting firm out of downtown Toronto. The kind of firm that gets called when a company's books don't add up and somebody needs to figure out exactly where the money went before the auditors do. I built it from nothing after 6 years grinding through Bay Street as the only woman, the only person who'd grown up in subsidized housing in Scarborough, in a boardroom full of men who inherited their seats. I was good at my job. I was good enough that by the time I turned 30, I had clients who trusted me with numbers that could end careers. I thought I was marrying a man who respected that. Instead, I was standing on the front steps of the Albany Club in a navy silk dress, watching a hostess with a clipboard run her finger down a list twice and apologetically tell me my name wasn't on it. Before I get into it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you've ever had in-laws try to write you out of your own life, hit subscribe, because this one gets ugly before it gets satisfying. The night had started normal enough. My fiancé Marcus and I were supposed to host our engagement party together. 200 guests, his family's law firm colleagues mixed with my side, my cousins from Scarborough, my aunties, the women from my mosque who'd known me since I was 12 and used to braid my hair before school. I'd paid for 60% of it myself. Marcus's mother, not Eleanor, I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name was Caroline. Caroline had insisted on handling the venue contract because, in her words, the Albany Club doesn't deal directly with outside vendors, dear, it's all done through members. I'd let her put her name on it. Marcus begged me to. He said it was just a formality, that his mother needed to feel like she still mattered in his life, and I, fool that I was, thought I was being generous. The hostess at the door kept apologizing, flipping pages, her face going pinker by the second. I'm so sorry, Ms. Okafor, there's just no Natalie on tonight's list. The event was actually moved. Mrs. Whitfield came by personally on Tuesday with updated paperwork. She said the original booking had some issues, and she'd transferred everything to a private room at the Toronto Hunt Club instead. The Toronto Hunt Club, of course. The single most exclusive, oldest money, whitest institution in this city, where Caroline had been angling for a board seat for 3 years. My stomach went cold before my brain even caught up. Did she say anything about the guest list? I asked, keeping my voice level the way I'd trained myself to during a dozen boardroom crises. The hostess swallowed. She said the new list was capped. Family and select partners from the firm only. I think it said 50 people. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was my cousin Yara, who was supposed to be driving 4 carloads of my family in from Scarborough and Brampton. People who'd taken the night off work, who'd bought dresses and rented suits, who'd booked a hotel room downtown so they wouldn't have to drive home late. I let it ring out. I turned and looked at the cold stone steps of the Albany Club, completely dark, not a single light on inside, and I felt something in my chest go very, very quiet and very, very sharp. I dialed Marcus first. He picked up on the second ring, and in the background I could hear ice clinking in a glass, soft jazz, the unmistakable murmur of a room full of people having a perfectly lovely evening without me. Hey babe, he said, careful, like he already knew this call was coming and had rehearsed his lines. I didn't bother with the greeting. I asked him why I was standing outside a dark building while he was somewhere warm with a drink in his hand. Nat, listen, Mom and I talked, and the Albany just felt like the wrong vibe, you know? Too stuffy, too big. The Hunt Club is way more elegant, way more audacieux, I repeated. Or you and your mother. He sighed the sigh he always did when he thought I was being difficult instead of correct. Don't make this a thing. Mom pulled serious strings to get the Hunt Club on a Saturday in October. It's going to be beautiful. 50 of our closest people. 50 out of 200. I asked him, very calmly, what exactly I was supposed to tell my aunties, who were already on the 401 driving in from Brampton. What I was supposed to tell Yara, who'd taken a personal day to do this. What I was supposed to tell the women from my mosque who'd watched me grow up. He dropped his voice into that careful, patronizing register. Nat, you know how it gets when your whole side shows up. It's a lot loud. My partners are going to be there tonight, the ones deciding whether I make senior associate this winter. Mom just thought, for optics, a smaller, more polished group made more sense. Optics, my family, the people who fed him at every Eid dinner for 2 years, who showed him more warmth in one evening than his own mother had shown me in 2 years, reduced to a word you'd use about a corporate rebrand. I asked him if he'd planned on telling me any of this before I showed up to a locked building in a $5,000 dress. He stammered something about wanting it to be a nice surprise, and I knew, in the particular way you know things about people you've loved too long, that he was lying badly and had been lying for days. You let your mother take the deposit, change the venue, and lock my family out, and you thought I'd just smile and get in a cab, I said. Silence. Then, quietly, pathetically, I'm sorry you feel blindsided. Just send everyone to a restaurant, I'll cover dinner. Please just come to the Hunt Club. The ceremony toast starts in 40 minutes and Mom is already stressed. I hung up without another word. My sister Amani, who'd been standing 2 steps behind me the whole time, clutching her own small bouquet of pinned roses, grabbed my arm. Nat, what are we doing? I told her we were going to the Hunt Club, all of us. A black Range Rover pulled up to the curb before I could even finish the sentence, and out stepped Marcus's brother-in-law, Derek. Caroline's son-in-law, married to Marcus's older sister, a portfolio manager at one of the big banks who'd made it a personal hobby since the day we got engaged to remind me, gently and constantly, that I'd done well for myself. He adjusted his sunglasses, looked me up and down with the particular kind of pity rich people reserve for people they consider charity cases, and said, "Well, this is a tragic little scene." He didn't ask if I was okay. He reached into his coat, pulled out a checkbook, scribbled something fast, and let it flutter onto the hood of my car. A check. For $8,000. Call it a parting gift, he said. Take it, pay your vendors, take a trip somewhere warm, and send your relatives back up the 400 where they're more comfortable. You and I both know they were never going to fit in at the Hunt Club. It's better for everyone if you just take the loss quietly. I picked the check up off the hood. I held it for a second, long enough for him to think he'd won, and then I tore it cleanly in half and in half again, and let the pieces fall onto his very expensive Italian shoes. I don't want your money, Derek, I said. Tell Caroline I'll see her at the Hunt Club in 20 minutes. With my family. His smug face actually faltered. Are you insane? It's a private club. Caroline will have you removed. Then she'd better call security, I said, already turning toward my car. Because 200 of my people are about to crash her little party. You'll want to be there for the finale, Derek. Trust me. I called Yara back and told her to redirect every single car straight to the Hunt Club, not the original address. She asked if I was sure. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. What none of them knew yet, not Marcus, not Caroline, not smug Derek with his torn-up check, was that 6 weeks earlier my firm had been quietly retained by an anonymous investment group that had just bought out 60% of the debt on a struggling historic property in Midtown. A property bleeding money for 3 years, defaulting on its mortgage, one bad season from being sold off to developers. A property whose membership committee had spent so much time sipping scotch and talking about old families that not one of them had bothered to read the loan documents I now had power of attorney over, the Toronto Hunt Club. I sat in the back of my car while it merged onto the Don Valley Parkway, my family's cars falling into formation behind me like a small, determined caravan, and I thought about every diner shift I'd worked through undergrad, every all-nighter building financial models on a laptop that overheated if I left it running past midnight, every Bay Street partner who'd told me a girl from Scarborough Housing didn't have the pedigree to handle 9-figure accounts. I thought about how Caroline used to compliment my exotic features at dinner, like it was a kindness. I thought about Marcus telling me, 2 years in, that I just needed to be a little smaller around his mother so she wouldn't feel threatened. The cold was where I built my career. And the cold was exactly where I was about to finish it. We pulled up the long gravel drive past the wrought iron gates, my driver flashing an old vendor pass at the startled security guard before he could even raise the barrier. 4 cars of my family poured out behind the lead vehicle, my aunties in their best dresses, my uncles adjusting cufflinks, laughing, completely unaware of the storm they were about to walk into. We were loud and beautiful, and we did not apologize for taking up space, not for 1 second, as we crossed that manicured lawn toward the clubhouse doors. Inside, a string trio was playing something quiet and forgettable for 50 very pale, very polished guests holding champagne flutes. The moment our group came through the heavy oak doors, the music actually stopped mid-note. 50 heads turned at once. I spotted Caroline immediately, in pearls and ivory silk, champagne trembling slightly in her hand. For one honest second, I saw real fear cross her face before she smoothed it into a mask of wounded grace and rushed toward me, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. Natalie, what on earth do you think you're doing? This is private. You're embarrassing everyone. Her voice was a stage whisper, pitched perfectly for the room. I looked down at her hand until she let go. I tried to spare you this, she said, eyes darting to my auntie standing quietly by the door. Look at them, Natalie, this simply isn't their environment. I did this to protect you from embarrassing yourself. I smiled at her, slow and cold. I'm not here to ruin anything, Caroline. I'm here to enjoy the reception I paid for, the one you so generously relocated using money you took without asking me. Her face actually went white. Money, said out loud, in front of her people, the one true sin in her world. Marcus came at us next, dragging me a few steps away with a grip too tight on my elbow, hissing about his managing partner standing right by the bar, about how I was about to ruin everything he'd worked for. And then, low enough that he probably thought no one else could hear, he said the thing that ended whatever was left between us. Just for tonight, stop acting like you're still from the East End. Act like you belong here and fix this. The string trio stayed silent. The whole room seemed to be holding its breath. I felt the last soft thing in me toward him go quiet and cold and final. I didn't lower my voice, I let it carry. You think my family is an embarrassment? My family paid for the suit you're wearing tonight. My family fed you every holiday for 2 years while your own mother could barely look at me across a table. You failed your bar exam twice, Marcus, and it was my contacts that got you your interview anyway, so don't you dare tell me who doesn't belong in a room. A ripple went through the 50 elite guests. Marcus's managing partner, a tall, silver-haired man named Whitfield. No relation to Caroline, coincidence of surnames, just an old wasp name that seemed to multiply itself in rooms like this, stepped forward frowning. Marcus? Marcus opened his mouth and nothing useful came out. I told Whitfield, calmly, professionally, exactly how his firm's star junior associate had landed his job, through my connections despite 2 failed bar attempts I'd personally helped cover for. Whitfield's face hardened into something final. Don't bother coming in Monday, I said, and walked away. Caroline shrieked for someone to call security, that we were trespassing, that we were threatening her family. Derek, delighted to finally have a reason, pulled out his phone and called the police himself, his voice suddenly loud and performative for the room. We've got a hostile group, a mob, refusing to leave. Yeah, send units now. A hostile group, 200 people in formal wear, standing in complete silence, were apparently a mob the second they were, black and brown faces in a room that had spent a century deciding who got to belong in it. My uncle Tobias, a retired high school vice principal, turned to our group and quietly told everyone to keep their hands visible. Stay calm, let me handle it. Nobody moved, nobody raised a voice. We stood there with more dignity than the people screaming for our arrest. When the sirens finally wailed up the gravel drive and the doors burst open, 5 officers walked in expecting chaos and found 200 people standing in complete composed silence and 50 panicked socialites in cocktail dresses. The lead officer's eyes swept the room, visibly confused, and then landed on me. Evening, Miss Okafor, he said, taking off his cap. Heard there was some trouble. The room went dead silent. Derek's face drained of color. He knew the local sergeant from this division, knew him, recognized that the officer had used my name with something close to respect. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a sealed folder with the Ontario Corporate Registry stamp on it. There's no trouble, Sergeant. I'm just here for the reception I paid for. What I'd like reported is that the people hosting this unsanctioned private event don't actually have the authority to be using this room tonight. Caroline laughed, sharp and disbelieving. She's delusional. This club has belonged to the same families for 120 years. It did, I said, until 2 months ago, when it defaulted on its mortgage and a private investment group quietly bought 60% of the debt and the building along with it. That group retained my firm. I hold power of attorney over their stake. I held the document up so the sergeant and the room could read the seal clearly. I don't need an invitation to my own building, Caroline. I sit on the board that decides who's allowed to host anything here. The collective silence that followed had weight to it. Caroline's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the stone floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Caroline, cornered and humiliated in front of 50 people whose respect she'd spent her whole life curating, did the one thing that finished her completely. She turned on Derek, screaming that none of this would have happened if he hadn't pressured her to find $60,000 fast for his temporary cash flow problem, that she'd had no choice but to pull it from somewhere, that she didn't know it would blow up like this. The room had gone quiet enough that every word landed clean. I looked at the sergeant. Did you catch that? He had. Because what Caroline had just confessed, in front of 200 witnesses and a police officer, was that the $60,000 she'd transferred from my wedding deposit hadn't covered the venue change at all. She'd needed liquid cash fast to bail her son-in-law out of something. And the only account Caroline had signing authority over besides our wedding deposit was the children's literacy charity she'd chaired for the past 4 years, the one that ran reading programs in housing complexes not unlike the one I grew up in. It turned out Derek's boutique investment fund had quietly lost millions of client money months earlier, and with regulators starting to circle, he'd gone to his mother-in-law for an emergency bailout. Caroline, desperate and out of personal funds, had drained nearly $80,000 from the charity's account to cover him, then panicked when the board scheduled an audit and used my wedding deposit to try to plug the hole before anyone noticed. She had stolen from children's literacy programs to protect a fraud and then blamed my family for being too loud to attend her cover story. I'd called 2 reporters from the Toronto Star and a local city news crew the moment Derek, had thrown that check at my feet, certain something this ugly was about to surface. They arrived right as Caroline's confession was still hanging in the air, cameras rolling, catching her sob and Derek's pale, sweating face in real time. I stood in front of the cameras in my engagement dress and told the truth calmly, the way I tell every client's hardest truth. That my own family had been called a hostile mob for the crime of showing up in formal wear, that the woman who'd orchestrated it had stolen from a children's charity to bail out a man who'd defrauded his investors, and that the only thing either of them had actually proven tonight was exactly who they were underneath the pearls and the membership fees. Derek was arrested within the hour for filing a false police report, and within the month for securities fraud once the provincial regulators got the documents I'd quietly compiled. He's serving time now. His marriage didn't survive the headlines. Caroline avoided jail by liquidating nearly everything she owned to repay the charity, but she lost her board seats, her church standing, and every friend who'd once fought for a seat near her at galas like this one. I heard she lives outside the city now in a small rental and doesn't show her face downtown anymore. Marcus never recovered his career either. No firm in this city would touch an associate tied to a fraud scandal and a falsified bar record. Last I heard he was doing legal aid work 2 hours north, finally living the modest life he always quietly thought he was too good for. I took the engagement ring off in front of all 200 of my people that same night on that same marble floor and dropped it into an abandoned champagne glass on my way out the door. I didn't look back to see whose face it landed in front of. We didn't go home defeated. I'd already called in a favor from a client I'd helped through a brutal restructuring the year before, and by the time we walked out of that building, a private room at the Fairmont downtown was waiting, fully catered, an open bar, a real party for the people who'd actually shown up for me. My aunties kicked their heels off and danced until 2 in the morning. My uncle Tobias gave a toast that made half the room cry. Nobody there thought for 1 second that we didn't belong. It's been over a year now. The dust has settled mostly. I rebuilt my firm bigger than it was before, and I learned something I wish I'd known at 25 instead of 31. That anyone who needs you to shrink yourself to be loved was never actually loving you, just the convenience of your silence. I spent 2 years trying to make myself smaller to fit into a family that resented my existence on sight. I will never do that again for anyone, for any table. If you've ever had to walk away from people who made you feel like you didn't belong in your own life, tell me about it in the comments. And if this one got you, hit subscribe. There are a lot more stories like this one still to tell.